recorded spontaneously and 100% unscripted in front of a pile of boxes as we start to unpack and settle into our new apartment. Let's just disclose my bias. Let's just get this out of the way. In case you think this is going to be a pro-China video, pro-communist government, or pro-Muslim, no. Around here, is this our third copy of Tombstone in this relationship? I had a copy of this book before we got together. You had a copy you got from the library, and now me and my girlfriend have this copy as a couple. If you don't know, this is one of the kind of groundbreaking works in the history of documenting, disclosing, and discussing the legacy of Mao Zedong and communism and the number of millions of people who were killed by it. Let's be all the way real. Before this book was published, people would talk about those issues, but they always felt uncertain. People felt uncomfortable putting a number when they said millions had died. People felt, there was no easy proven resource to invoke or footnote. We could just say, look, these are the facts, and this brought together, as you can see, it's a huge book. It's even longer than the original Chinese. This brought together a mountain of research and put it together in a form that was kind of impossible to refute or quibble with. I think a lot of people who don't read the book, it still serves a kind of psychological function of giving you a sense of certainty. Okay, the facts are there if I ever want to consult it. Exactly how many people starved to death in what province, when, at what time, has this quality of documentary evidence. Interestingly, on a much, much smaller scale, there's a similar study in the history of Cambodia. And I remember for most people, they never read it. But they felt, okay, that's, they counted the skulls. Those are the people who did the research and counted up how many dead bodies. And no matter how imperfect, feeling that the math has been done, it's been documented, it serves this really important purpose in terms of the psychology of political history, you might say. All right. So I am going to criticize Serpentza, not from a pro-China perspective, not from a pro-Mao Zedong perspective. I was asked by a few different viewers of my channel to comment on this other analyst of Chinese politics. And what I said in writing was, no, Serpentza is not someone whom I can respect either for his opinion or his research. And that backhanded statement already discloses entirely what the problem is. The guy doesn't do research. He is one of these people who states salacious, attention-grabbing opinions on YouTube. He makes a lot of money doing it. We watched a video of his recently where he opened with saying, I forget his wording. He said something like, "I'm not just saying this to get attention. I'm not just saying this to be provocative." And of course, what he was saying was just to get attention and just to be provocative. Of course, this was disclaiming the exact opposite of reality. That's what he does. He doesn't do, the four things I set out in the name of my main channel: active research and informed opinion. This is not what he's about. And the other leitmotif I draw attention to again on my channel is the importance of sympathy as an analytical tool. So he had a video recently in which he featured himself burning a portrait of Mao Zedong. I guess I'll give the link below this video. And currently that video has over 200,000 views. So I certainly can't hope to challenge that by reaching an audience of equal size. And, he's reaching that audience because he's telling people something they already want to hear. I'm going to tell you something maybe you don't want to hear. All right? Even though I am deeply aware of the atrocities Mao Zedong is responsible for, even though I am aware of both the features of his ideology and the failings of his ideology, if you want to understand why Chinese people still today, living in the shadow of those atrocities, put up a portrait of Mao Zedong on their wall proudly, you have to use sympathy as an analytical tool. And I have the humility to read this kind of stuff and know all this stuff and be horrified by this. I can remember two different occasions where I was sitting with a professor, two different professors of Chinese history, Chinese politics, and where we both had tears in our eyes. Like me and the professor. We didn't weep openly, but where this stuff gets emotionally overwhelming. My own family history is connected to this, political history, so on and so forth. So no, it's not a purely dry academic engagement with the facts. I can know all these things and yet have the humility to recognize that even though this is the legacy of Mao Zedong, it is not the only legacy of Mao Zedong. I am not in a position to say to people who put his poster on the wall, this is all that Mao Zedong represents. This is the only thing it represents, and this is what it must mean to you. If you are familiar with the history of any of the former British colonies, so places that were colonized by Britain and then were liberated one way or another, became independent countries, whether through revolution or devolution, as the history may be, if you go to those countries, you'll always have the strange experience of meeting elderly people, local elderly people, indigenous elderly people, who are flying the flag of the former British Empire, or the British Empire colony. And you can't just start with these, oh, they must be racist, they must be white supremacists, they must be fascists or something. If you take the time to talk to them and sympathize with them and analyze why it is they're putting up this flag, you will understand why it is they're doing it. So stereotypically in many of those colonies, it may be that they are disappointed with the corruption of the new regime that replaced the British. It may be there was a particular civil war in that country and they were on one side rather than the other. You can get to understand what this symbol means to them, for them as a person who was part of a colonized, conquered country that gained its independence. And in some sense, they're using a symbol that challenges that narrative, that they're rejecting the heroic narrative of independence. They're wanting to identify with something else, right? And you have to recognize this flag symbolizing the British Empire, it doesn't mean to this person, what it means to me. It doesn't even mean, what it may mean in a sort of objective sense. If you look it up in an encyclopedia, what does this flag symbolize? Well, that's not its significance here and now. You have to have the humility to recognize that in China, you will meet people who are deeply disappointed with the current government of Xi Jinping, who don't like the direction the Communist Party is taking now. And the way for them to criticize what the Communist Party is doing today is to put up the image of Mao Zedong. And if you talk to them and you can ask, you can say, well, do you really want to go back to having people starving to death? They'll say no. All right? They'll say, no, that's not what I'm thinking of when I put this up. When I put this up, what I'm against is the collusion between huge corporations like Samsung and the government of China and Apple and all these foreign corporations that come here. This is only one of many possible answers, but they may tell you that they are against the profound corruption of the Communist Party, where it's become a lackey of Western corporate capitalist interests and just making the rich richer. Or they may tell you, well, yes, it's true, people starved to death under Mao Zedong, but on the other hand, the people who ruled over us didn't drive Italian sports cars like Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and now they do, and that they're against that. I attended a political protest against the Communist Party in Kunming, China. I think this is in Kunming, China. And everyone was elderly. They were all elderly people at this protest, right? And the police/military were kind of standing back and observed. There was just barely being tolerated, this political protest. And the protesters didn't hold the signs, I noted. There must be some legal reason for this. They hung a very delicate, like fishing line between the trees, and their political statements were draped over this fishing line. And then they stood there silently in the park. They didn't chant. There was no freedom of political expression in China, especially not in public places like this. And, they were using the symbols of traditional communism to challenge what they saw as the immorality of or corruption of the government in the present day. All right? It doesn't take a genius to see this. It doesn't take a supreme level of detachment and compassion to say, okay, when I see the portrait of Mao Zedong, this is what it means to me. And it may bring up memories, from this book that has horrifying descriptions of terrible things happening to people. For me, this may be associated with oppression, in a word. But for someone else, it may be associated with a kind of healthy challenge to the current political order and a kind of philosophical challenge to the crass materialism of the government of China today. Because the government of China today says all they care about is getting rich. And they say, well, they feel like socialism and communism and Chineseness itself, the idea of the mission and mandate of the Chinese nation going back thousands of years and looking into the future for 100 years, they felt it was about something more than just money and they want to challenge that. And if you just talk to people, if you're just willing to sympathize with people, you're going to find out what those things are. To give just one more example, so this isn't too, I know it doesn't sound too terribly optimistic. Another thing that the portrait of Mao Zedong could symbolize for them is just racism, is just xenophobia. There are people you can talk to in China who will complain to you that now China is full of foreigners, or it's full of other ethnic groups that they're racist towards or xenophobic towards. And then when they put up the image of Mao Zedong, for them personally, it means they want to go back to the more xenophobic China-only way that life was when they were a kid or when their grandparents were kids or whatever it was. They have some memory of that. So it could just be nationalism in a very narrow, racist, xenophobic sense. But you can't even assume that. It's not like you can see that and assume it. And in case you think this is a special problem with the portrait of Mao Zedong, when I first started going to Taiwan, it was very difficult for me to accept people putting up, images of the old Kuomintang regime. Like, whoa, what are you guys doing? Aren't you proud that you finally achieved democracy and got rid of the Kuomintang and all the terrible things associated with the Kuomintang as a military dictatorship? Why would you put up this, whether it's a flag or a poster, or an image of one of the leaders? Why would you be celebrating the heritage of the Kuomintang? Well, I had to get over that and understand there are really sophisticated, really particular reasons for this. Now, look, I'm of Jewish heritage. In Taiwan, you see the Nazi swastika being put up. In Taiwan, you see the Japanese World War II era flag, the flag of the Japanese Empire that's put up. And it's shocking. And if you ask people why they've put it up, and we're talking about ethnically Chinese people in Taiwan who are putting up these flags, they'll give you a lot of different answers, but I bet not a single one is going to tell you that they put that flag up because they're anti-Semitic. They have their own very peculiar political reasons for what that flag means to them and what the causes they're supporting now or what questions they're trying to ask. Look, guys, this does not mean that politics is a kind of free and boundless garden of neither right nor wrong. It's not. Politics is an incredibly dicey and difficult theater where we're making minute decisions and distinctions between right and wrong all the time. But we precisely have to move past the mere stigmatization of symbols and say, oh, you have this portrait of Mao Zedong on the wall, therefore you support tens of millions of people being killed. Move forward to a sympathetic, analytical approach to politics where you understand that what this symbol means to this person may be radically different from what you feel subjectively as the analyst, or even what might be established as being its objective meaning in some kind of historical sense in terms of the sense of what's written down in an encyclopedia.